Welcome to the ASA Podcast, where we focus on subcontractors, the construction industry, and the issues and people making an impact. The ASA Podcast is brought to you by the American Subcontractors Association and the Foundation of the American Subcontractors Association. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the ASA Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Klein, and with me today is Johnny Zitko, Vice President of Risk Services for Assured Partners. Welcome to the program, Johnny. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Assured Partners?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Look forward to our conversation today. Johnny Zitko, I work for Assured Partners, as you mentioned, Vice President of Risk Services, which is a fancy way of saying that I sell a little bit of insurance, right? But also help our clients build out risk management programs, including loss control and safety programs, claims management programs, and help them with their data and analytics. But Assured Partners, if those of you on in the audience here isn't familiar with us, we are the fifth largest retail insurance broker in the U.S. And approximately $2.5 billion of revenue that does all things of insurance, of commercial lines insurance, employee benefits, and personal lines. So it's what we do.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I know that a lot of ASA members are familiar with Assured Partners already because you're a longtime supporter and sponsor of the organization. So
yeah, we love the organization and enjoy being part of it.
Thank you for that. So today, Johnny is with us to talk about the experience modification rate, or EMR, which impacts a lot of ASA members and their companies, especially those who are business owners. Let's dive into that. I know we've got a few questions to get through, and I'll kick off with number one. What is experience modification rate? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, great number. Sorry, but great question. So, I'm glad you mentioned EMR. So throughout the show here, if I mention EMR or mod or experience mod, whatever it is, we're all talking about the same thing because kind of refer to it in the industry in a couple different ways. So, but yeah, experience mod. If you're a business owner, you likely know what this is. But simply put, your mod is just a factor used by the insurance companies to help determine what your work comp premiums are going to be. Okay. And that reflects your claims history over a three-year period. Okay. And you're compared to similar businesses in the same industry and in the same geographical area. Okay. And really there's three main factors in the experience mod. The main and most impactful are your claims history, right? Or your losses. The next is payroll, and the one after that would be your payroll classification codes. So again, it's one of several factors that will go into determining what your work comp premium is. And to kind of put that into the context a little bit, when an underwriter looks at your risk, right, or your profile, they will come up with what we call manual premium. Okay, your manual premium takes into a few considerations. What do you do? What's your risk? Your loss history and that sort of thing, right? And then from there, your underwriter will go ahead and apply certain other factors to that to help determine what the overall premium is going to be. And one of those factors is going to be your experience mod. And that could either help you or it could hurt you.
Would you say in the same industry, so a lot of ASA members are tradespeople, so they might be plumbers or HVAC or electricians, painters, whatnot.
Yes.
Are you comparing, plumbers to plumbers? Is that how that works, or is it construction in general?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it is. So it would be plumbers to plumbers, right? Okay. So say business, plumbers to plumbers in the same industry, okay, and in the same kind of in the same geographical area. So, but to expand on that a little bit. A plumber that has maybe 50 employees is not going to be compared to a plumber that has 5,000 employees. Okay.
Okay.
So, but to your point, a plumber is not going to be compared to an electrician because they're not doing the same thing. It's not the same risk. Okay. So
Gotcha.
it's not fair to compare that and determine. And when we get into this, this will make a little bit more sense because, as I mentioned, well, one of the big drivers for your mod is losses, right? So if I'm a plumber, my exposure is different than it would be if I was an electrician or someone building homes or whatever it may be, right? So that's the basis of that model.
Okay. So when you talk risk, you're talking like as an electrician, there's an inherent risk of electrocution or some
Yeah.
terrible things like that. So it's probably a higher risk than something other trades might face. So they take that into account.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Right. And that's where so I mentioned the three factors, right? I mentioned your loss history, mentioned your payroll, and I mentioned the classifications, right? So if I'm a plumber, my employees are going to be classified in a certain way, right? I'm going to have my admin folks that are back at the office, accounting, HR, that are doing one function that has less of an exposure than if they were a laborer out there actually doing the work, right? So those classes are compared differently within that business as well. And the payroll component of that really kind of tells the equation of when you calculate this mod. The payroll component of that really says how big is the company? Because if your payroll is large, it likely tells you that you have many employees, right? And if you have many employees, then there's a better likelihood that you're going to have an injury, right? Or a loss.
Yeah.
Compared to a lower payroll company that has less employees and the likelihood of them having an injury is a little bit lesser.
Okay. Is there a list of things you can run through to say how the EMR is calculated? I mean, obviously payroll size, number of employees.
Yeah.
But that's
so simply put here, Mike. So first of all, the mod is a long algorithm, and I'm not going to go through it all because I'm not a scientist. It's a long algorithm that a lot of people look at and they're like, what is this? But simply put, your mod is your actual losses compared to what your expected losses should be. Okay. And again, that's for similar businesses in the same industry in the same geographical area. So, and to elaborate a little more on that geographical area, right? So a company in Illinois isn't going to be compared to a company in Texas or in Florida or New York or whatever it may be, right? It's in that same whole geographical area because generally those risks are going to be a little bit different. So what factors, the main factor there, again, I mentioned the actual losses compared to your expected losses. Okay. And that's the biggest driver when it comes to your mod, again, or is your claims history. What does that look like? So if we just take that equation, right? So your actual losses, that's actually what you experience. And this is a 3-year look back, Mike. So if we're going to calculate what that looks like, it's not the current year that you're currently experiencing or the current insurance term that you're in. It's the 3 years prior to that.
Your history.
So any losses that you experience within those 3 years are factored into that calculation.
Okay.
Compared to what those expected losses should be. And this is where the importance of being compared to similar businesses and similar industries come into play, right? Because your expected losses should be compared to someone who's your size doing the same thing, right? So a plumber isn't going to be compared to a manufacturer who's making widgets. It just doesn't make sense to do that, right? Or even a plumber compared to an electrician compared to a concrete company. Okay, so that's where the expected losses come into play. To break it down just a little bit further, the calculation uses what we call a split rating system. Okay. So it breaks down the losses a little bit further. So you have your primary losses and then you have your excess losses. Okay. Your primary losses really focuses on the frequency of losses. So how many losses that you incur over a given period of time. Okay. Where your excess losses really focuses on the severity of those losses.
Okay.
Okay. So when I mentioned that algorithm, it's broken down within that in that algorithm of primary, right? Primary are weighted differently than excesses are, right? Generally speaking, primary losses are going to hurt you more because there's a greater impact in it, and it kind of tells the story of a systematic breakdown potentially on safety issues when you have more losses, right? So that's why frequency generally hurts you a little bit more than the excess losses do, which are the severity of it, right? Because you can have one shock loss and that could just be an anomaly.
Right.
So again, that's weighted differently. Um, and within that split rating system, we have what we call a split point. Okay. Um, I'm out of Chicago, so I'll just the example I'll give you is in Illinois. Illinois split point is 18,500. So if you have a loss, okay, that has reserves up to $18,500, that's going to be calculated into the algorithm at 100%. Okay. Anything above 18.5 is what we consider an excess loss. And it's generally it's discounted thereafter 18.5. Okay. Another point here, as I'm just as I'm talking through it here, when we break down the losses a little bit further, the calculation or the mod, it captures indemnity losses versus medical only losses. All right. That's the simplest way I could put it. I could break it down a little bit further, but the simplest way I can put it is to distinguish between those two, right? Indemnity losses are essentially an injury that is requiring that employee to have lost time from work, right? So they're out a week, or two, a month, or a year, or whatever it may be, right? And medical only is simply as just they're not losing any time, okay? And it just they're just going to seek treatment, and insurance companies paying for medical bills, okay?
Gotcha.
And that's an important distinguishment because in that calculation, right, an indemnity claim is weighted a lot more differently than what a medical only claim is weighted as. We love medical only claims because it's discounted at a 70% discount in that calculation. So that's huge, right? So if we have 10 claims, but 9 of them are medical only claims compared to one indemnity claim, that's going to help our cause.
Gotcha.
Okay. So that's what we kind of want to see.
Gotcha. So what's the impact overall of the EMR on a work comp premiums?
Yeah. So again, this is a factor used to determine what the premiums are, right? So if you have a higher mod, okay, because your mod is just a number, right? It's a number. Your average or your baseline is what we call a 1.0.
Okay.
If you have a higher mod that's above a 1.0, okay, you're going to be paying more in premiums. If you have a lower mod, okay, then you're going to be paying less in premiums. Higher mod means that you probably have a bad claims history. You've had more claims than what you're expected to have. And then if you have lesser claims, right, or if you have a lower mod, then you have a good claims history and it's better than what's expected. Simply put, right? So let's just kind of easy math here. If we have $100,000 premium, let's call it, right? And theoretically, if your mod, without any other factors being factored into this, if your mod is a 1.25, that means you're going to be paying $125,000 versus 100. If you're a 0.75, you're going to be paying $75,000, okay, versus $100,000, right? So you can see that impact of the mod. So it's important. It's important to control that mod because at the end of the day, it's hurting your bottom line or it's helping your bottom line.
So how do you control it? I mean, obviously, don't have accidents.
Yeah, let's just not have accidents. Let's just simplify this and just don't have an accident, right? That's obviously easier said than done. But I mean, yes, I mean, I say that, tongue in cheek a little bit, but if we can not have an accident by implementing good safety measures and having a good safety program, then we're in a good spot here, right? And it's not only, yes, let's not have a loss. But it's it's trying to manage those losses too, right? Or mitigate those losses as much as we possibly can. Especially with the audience that we're talking to here, they're on jobs, they're doing, heavy duty work, and there's injuries that happen all the time. So it's hard to prevent them from happening altogether. But if we have certain protocols in place, we can help mitigate how bad that injury could be, right?
Okay,
Meaning
right.
that if it's not as severe because we have good protocols in place and policies in place, maybe that injury, when that injury gets to the insurance company, right, and they post a reserve, which are these claims dollars that we're talking about, maybe it's not going to be nearly as high, because the lower the claim dollars, the better it is for our mod.
If a company has, is this taken into account? If a company has safety programs in place,
Yeah.
is that taken into account in determining the EMR? I mean, there are companies out there that are pretty sophisticated when it comes to their safety protocols, and others that maybe not so much. Do insurance companies take that into account?
Yeah, so not in the mod, right?
Okay,
Directly, no. The answer there is no. So in that calculation that we talk about, there's no factor in it by saying, do you have a safety program? Check yes or no. And all of a sudden it's kind of discounted or weighted differently. No. Now an insurance company, when they're calculating premiums, as your insurance broker, our job is to tell a story of what you do, how you do it, and what you do to build that overall risk management program. And part of that is us telling the story to the insurance companies that they do safety well, and this is what they do. They do X, Y, and Z. They do these things. And for that, if that story is told the right way to the insurance companies, then their appetite towards that risk could be better, right?
gotcha.
And they can apply certain credits if they wanted to, right? Again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but if you're doing things well, and we can show that you have a safety program that has a safety manager, we have safety meetings, we talk about safety all the time, good claims management. We'll get into some of that stuff a little bit later. But if you're doing all these things, then the appetite for that insurance company becomes a little bit wider, and better options for us to find you insurance.
Gotcha. So the mod is really just, I'll say, empirical and based on your history and the claims that you've
Yeah.
had,
Yeah.
based on your industry, based on your location. Those are really the only factors that go into making that determination.
It is, but as we've been talking about with the safety piece of it, and to your point, work comp in general, right? Or even if we just break it down to the mod, is generally what we consider the most controllable line of coverage that we have.
Hmm.
Because again, if you're doing the right things, if you have a great safety program that's focused on that, and it's a big component of how you run your business, right? You are going to prevent claims from happening.
Right.
So theoretically, your argument there is that you do the right things, you're not going to have claims. And if you don't have claims, you're going to have a low mod. And if you have a low mod, you're not going to be paying as much in insurance as you normally would if you're not focusing on it and you do have a lot of losses. Now you're paying more.
What other things can help lower the mod?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the losses are the most impactful, right? But within that, if we can keep these claims as a medical only claim, right? I talked about the indemnity versus the medical
Right.
only. If we can keep these as a medical only claim, right? That's reduced by 70%. Well, how do we do that? Well, there's a few things that we can do, right? I work with our clients a lot by implementing certain strategies that will help them maintain a medical only, meaning that when a claim happens, it gets reported to the insurance company. The insurance company will look at that, and the adjuster will determine, okay, is this going to be an indemnity claim or is this going to be a medical only claim? Okay. Well, we can develop strategies and protocols where, if it's not a serious injury, we're always going to report that claim as medical only. And until we tell that adjuster or insurance company that it's not, they're going to keep that as a medical only and not flip it over to an indemnity claim. Okay. Because once that's an indemnity claim, then it's again factored at that 100% with
Right.
that
Yeah.
split rating system, right? So we want to implement those strategies. So we work with our clients a lot by saying, all right, when we report a claim, let's make sure that we check these boxes and report it as medical only. So that's a big way. That can really impact your mod. We want to close claims that are out there in a timely manner. So for us, we're constantly in touch with the insurance companies on behalf of our clients just to see where these claims are at, because a lot of times, the companies will post a reserve, and there might be this big cushion there, with medical reserves. So they might have $50,000 in medical reserves, but this employee's back to work. He's not treating anymore, right? And there's that cushion where it's like, what is it doing there? And if we had these conversations with the companies, we can reduce those reserves. And depending on how big your company is, a $10,000 reduction or a $20,000 reduction could mean significant points reduced in your mod. So I want to make sure we're having those conversations. And the last thing I would say too is making sure that your classification payroll is accurate. So whatever your people are doing out there, we want to make sure that they're classified the right way. Because if they're not, they could be classified in a higher class code, meaning that their rate is a little bit higher, and that is weighted different in a calculation. So we want to make sure that they're always classified properly.
So a couple follow-ups then. First one is, so if you make a claim, how long do claims continue to affect the EMR calculation? You said it goes back only 3 years. So something beyond 3 years is no longer considered?
No, it's not. Now that may factor other things other than the mod, right? Being open longer, but when we're just talking directly about your mod, it's only that 3-year look back.
Okay.
Right. So for instance, let's kind of give an example here. We're in the year 2024. So if my policy term is from January 1 to January 1, 2024, right? This current year that we're in is not affecting my current mod, right? Because we're currently in it.
Right.
What it's affecting it is 2023, 2022, and 2021. Okay. So those 3 years that I have, okay, any losses within that are affecting me. We move into next year. What happens is that our current year, 2024, comes onto the mod, right? And our 2021 year falls off of the mod.
Drops off, right?
Right, drops off, right? So that 3-year look back is what affects you.
Okay. Is there ever a threshold, and it's probably different for every company, but is there ever like a dollar threshold where a company might consider self-paying smaller claims versus making an insurance claim?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? But so that's our part. That's our job as your insurance broker, to make sure that we're financing your risk in the proper way. Meaning that there's a couple of ways to skin the cat here in terms of of what kind of program you're in, right? And obviously we're just focusing on work comp here, right? Because that's what the experience mod is focused on. But we can put you in a guaranteed cost program, meaning that every dollar you pay in, it's the insurance company's responsibility to handle your claims, right? Guaranteed cost, everything you pay to the insurance company, they're handling your claims, right? This as simply as I could put it. Or we can put you in a high deductible type of program, meaning that up to a certain dollar amount, okay, the insured is responsible for that. So call it $100,000. If we put you in a high deductible program that has $100,000 deductible, that first $100,000 is the responsibility of the insured to pay.
Gotcha.
Okay. So again, we have to have the conversation about what your tolerance is in terms of those kind of programs. If you're a big, company, many employees, payroll's high, maybe that makes sense for you, right? If you're a smaller company, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but we want to have those conversations to make sure if it does or not.
Okay. If you have a bad EMR, and you're looking to improve it, so once you put some programs into place or take some actions to improve it, how long does it take to see an improvement in that rating?
Um, so your mod is calculated every year. Okay. Generally speaking, it's done, let's call it at that 6 month or 4 month mark before you expire.
Okay.
Right. We're kind of right in that window. All right. Give or take. So once it's promulgated, once it's calculated, your mod is what it is. Again, I'm not going to go down certain rabbit holes, but it is what it is, right? And once that happens, what we can do, we can control what's going to happen. We can potentially control what's going to happen going into that following year. Okay. Meaning that if we're having good conversations with the insurance companies and the claims adjusters about where these reserves are at, and if there, I mentioned that cushion, right? If there's a certain cushion in those reserves and we can address that before these mods are calculated or promulgated, then potentially what we're doing is dropping that mod heading into next year, right? The higher reserve, the worse it is. The lower the reserve, the best it is, right? So the reserve reduction piece of it is important for us to make sure that we have a handle on so we can kind of control that mod going into next year. So a lot of what we want to do and what we encourage our insurers to do is pay attention to the data. We will go out and we will have conversations with our insureds about, let's forecast what your mod's going to be, right? We have systems, we have software that we can plug in a bunch of data and forecast potentially what it's going to be next year, right? So if we know that we have a few claims out there that are going to impact us next year, we can show them what that impact is. That this $25,000 claim is costing you 4 points on your mod. But if we're able to reduce this by $10,000, then we're going to save you 2 points, right? I'm making up numbers here, but I think you get my point.
Right.
So we want to have those conversations before these rating systems or these rating bureaus are the ones who calculate your mod, before those bureaus calculate those mods, because again, we're potentially controlling what that's going to be heading into that following year.
So you mentioned, you said that the baseline rate is a 1.0, right?
Right.
And so how high can it go or how low can it go? Can you ever get to 0 or, I mean, 10? Is that what's normal?
Yeah. So that's different for every company based on your risk, based on your payroll, right? So size, based on what you do. No, it can't go to 0.
Okay.
Can't go to 0. Okay. And I've seen it, upwards of, well above 2.0,
Okay.
right? Getting close to 3, right? So you can get way up there, right? We don't want to see that. That's not good. But I've seen it as low as, under 0.5, right around the 0.5-ish area. And so, and that's obviously they're doing very, very well. They have for, a long-standing period of time. So that company is likely performing obviously very well. But yeah, so to your point, we kind of look at that and when we can calculate or forecast what it's going to look like next year, then now we're having a conversation about potentially, are you going to get an increase in your premium or are you going to get a decrease in your premium? Because, we're plugging that into our software. We're having the conversation of what that's going to look like heading into next year.
In terms of work then, because there's obviously a financial impact directly, if you've got to pay higher premiums or if what you're, it's an out-of-pocket cost. But what about in terms of like getting contracts? Does EMR affect your ability to get bid on contracts and win certain bids?
Love it. Great question. Especially with the audience we're talking to here, right? So in the construction world, okay, I'll focus here in Illinois, okay? Having a mod above a 1.0 could be detrimental to a company. Okay. So if I'm a subcontractor and I'm working with a general contractor, a lot of times, right? And, a lot of times a general contractor will require a subcontractor to have less than a 1.0 in order to win that contract, in order to win that job, right? So they make you submit what your mod is. And if you're at a 1.25, you're probably not going to get that job, right? Or if you've been working with that contractor for a long time, and that contract does say that you got to stay under a 1.0, and over a year, or 2 years period, it creeps up above that. That might be a difficult conversation to have, with the general contractor there. Okay. And also, what I'll say too is that, again, Illinois, we have what we call a contractor's credit. So when I mentioned that if you have a lower mod, you get a credit for that, right? So $100,000 manual premium, and if you're a 0.75, you're going to be paying $75,000, in premium, right? On top of that, if you're under a 1.0 in Illinois, they also apply what we call a contractor's credit. So on top of that 25% credit you're getting on your mod, you're also going to get a contractor's credit on top of that, dropping your premiums even more. So that's more of an incentive for a company to be safe, right? Prevent claims from happening, because you're getting a reduction just on your mod, right? And then you're also getting a reduction by applying that contractor's credit.
We are back. We fixed some technical difficulties, we'll call them. So here we are again. So we were talking about the mod rate before we were interrupted there. And specifically, we were talking about how it affects the ability to bid on contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that obviously is built into the bidding process, like you were saying, with GCs especially. They want to minimize their risk.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, so they don't want, I guess theoretically speaking here, like they don't want a company working on their job that isn't safe.
Right.
So if you have a 1.5 mod or 1.75 mod, I mean, that's a reflection that you experience a lot of losses. And ultimately that could be a very big exposure for the general contractor.
Yeah.
So built into those contracts and those bids, they say that you have to have an under a 1.0 mod. And if you don't, they likely will just take a pass on you, and you're gonna miss out on a job.
Is there any way that is the EMR ever wrong? I mean, is there something a company can do to make sure that it's accurate?
Yeah. Wrong isn't necessarily the right term, but it could be, depending on how we look at things, right? It could be inaccurate. So there are, again, I'm not going to get too deep into weeds here, but there are things where we can go back and argue. So let me take a quick step back. Depending on which state you live in, okay, there's rating bureaus that control the mod, okay? A large portion of the country is controlled by the NCCI, which is the National Council on Compensation Insurance. I think I have that right. National Council on Compensation Insurance. And that's a bureau that is the one who calculates and controls the mod, right? Certain states have their own state bureaus and that sort of thing, right? But we'll focus on the NCCI because the majority of the country it falls into that category. So at times, there's only a certain few things that you can go back to the NCCI and argue that this is wrong, right? Sometimes the claims dollars within, that calculation doesn't seem right. Unfortunately, that's not a good example for us or the insurer to go back. They won't accept that as an argument to recalculate their mod, right? But if your exposure has completely changed as a business, meaning that you're not doing this anymore, let's say you're a subcontractor, does many different things, but you're not doing this or you're not doing that, then you can have a conversation with them to potentially kind of readjust things, right? So wrong isn't necessarily the right term, but there are times where we can go back and we can have a conversation with those bureaus and see what we can do to adjust it.
Okay. You said these audits happen every year because you're recalculated every year based on length of time and adding years and years falling off. So aside from, let's say the I'll call them because I'm blanking on the word, but let's say the documentation related to any issues or accidents or claims, what other kind of documentation should a company keep on hand in prep for for an EMR audit?
Yeah, so the EMR audit is just a little bit different than, let's say, your insurance audit, right? So in work comp, a business gets audited on their work comp, meaning that they take a look at their payroll and they want to make sure that their payroll is accurate from when we started the term to when the term ends, right? Because a lot of what factors into your premiums are your payroll, meaning how big the company is. So that's one audit, right? And the EMR system isn't necessarily an audit, so to speak, but what's happening behind the scenes is the NCCI, and I'll focus on them. The NCCI is pulling all of this information from the insurance company themselves. So they're pulling all of the claims information from the insurance company, right? And then they're pulling a bunch of data and analytics from all of the insurance companies, because we talked about those expected losses, right? That's a whole nother discussion on where they're pulling that information from, but they have to get that information from somewhere. So if I'm insured with XYZ company, they're not just pulling all that information from XYZ company, right? There's hundreds of different work comp companies out there. So they got to pull all that information from that. So behind the scenes, this is happening. The NCCI is doing all that work, not directly with the insured or the business owner. They're just doing that behind the scenes. But we know as a broker, and if you've owned a business long enough, that within that 6 month, the 4 month mark, we know that the NCCI, the stat cards, right? The insurance companies have to file what we call stat cards, are filed with the NCCI. Once that's filed and it's promulgated, then becomes published and it's final, right? So within that time frame, if we can get there beforehand, as I mentioned, and we can reduce those reserves before those stat cards are filed, we're ahead of the game here and we're helping out.
So what else should people know? I've kind of gone through everything that's on my list and all the questions that have occurred to me in midstream here. What have we not covered that you think is important that we ought to cover here?
Yeah, so I guess I'll end with this. Just ways to help control your amount, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. So what kind of cost containment strategies can we implement to help control this? The biggest, most impactful way to do this is have a well-developed loss control and safety program. Okay. Are you having safety meetings? Is safety part of weekly meetings? Is this part of the discussion, right? So are you talking about safety within your organization? Are you doing safety audits, right? So are you doing site audits on your specific jobs? Sometimes the general contractor requires that, okay? But if not, are you doing weekly site audits to make sure that you're doing a walk around and you're working in a safe environment? Are you using the tools and resources available to you, whether it's internal from your company or possibly from your broker or your insurance company? Are you utilizing these resources to make sure that you have put your best foot forward in terms of your safety program? Okay. That's going to be your most impactful. We've been kind of joking throughout this conversation about not having claims, right?
Right.
That's doable. I mean, theoretically, that's doable, but you have to do the right things. Second thing I'd mention is, do you have a proper claims management program? Okay. So are you having claim reviews? Are you having discussions with your insurance company and your insurance broker about any open claims that you have? Okay. A lot of times we will create or set a schedule for claim reviews with our clients because it's important for us to sit at a table, so to speak, and let's make sure all the information available is out there, right? The insurance company and their adjuster has the information from the business owner or the company, okay, available to make proper decisions, right? If they don't, sometimes that's the case, then the reserves could be out of whack. They could be higher than they should be. We don't want that. We want them lower. The insurance broker is making sure that they're in constant communication with those insurance companies on behalf of our insureds to make sure that, again, we're maintaining or managing what those reserves look like, maintaining and managing the information available to them. Nurse triage programs, right? So do you have a nurse triage program where if an injury happens on a job site, you can potentially get on the phone, you're talking to a nurse within minutes, the nurse is able to triage the injury and kind of point you in the right direction for medical treatment. Should you go to the emergency room? Should you go to an occupational health clinic? Or should you just go to the truck, throw a Band-Aid on it and get back to work? So a lot of times we're getting that advice from foremen, from supervisors that we're busy. Last time I checked, we're probably not doctors or nurses. So the advice is generally, yeah, just go to treatment, do whatever you want. And sometimes that can get out of hand a little bit. And when it does get out of hand, then all of a sudden the onset of that claim is kicked off the wrong way, right? And then we could have higher reserves because of that. So using programs like nurse triage, and the other program I would say is, do you have a good return to work program? Because the quicker the employee comes back to work means that we are not paying them lost time anymore. Okay. And
Right.
Therefore, if they're working and they're not at home, okay, we're paying them, as we would pay them normally because they're doing their job, and work comp is not paying them. If work comp's not paying them, then we can control what those indemnity reserves are. So, so to speak.
Right.
Again, now we're lowering those reserves again, and that's helping control what that mod looks like. And then the last one, the thing I'll say, and we kind of touched upon this, is the third cost containment strategy is use data and analytics. Use the data available to you. So talk to your broker, at least at the mid-year, even before that, and see if there's any information that you guys can use together, right? As I mentioned, we have meetings constantly throughout the year with our clients, how we forecast that mod. We want to make sure that they understand what that mod is going to look like before it's calculated and promulgated with the stating with those rating bureaus, right? So have those conversations, but use that data to help determine, kind of where this is looking at, and what do we need to do then to help lower that, right? So use that information available. Then, use that data as well too, is to kind of figure out, am I in the right risk financing program? Should I be in a guaranteed cost? Should I be on a high deductible or self-insured program, right? So make sure that you're kind of using all this information to have the right conversations with your insurance broker.
Excellent. Thank you. This has personally been very informative for me. So it's been a great conversation.
It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
If people want to know, I know that Assured Partners, we've got you guys linked on the ASA website, asaonline.com. If people want to learn more about Assured Partners or reach out to you, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the easiest way, if you have any questions about your experience mod or you want to talk insurance, as you mentioned, there's a link on the website that you can just reach out to Assured General or Assured Partners in general. If you want to reach out to me, it's, just reach out with my email. I don't know if we provided that or not. It's, Johnny, JOHNNY. Excuse me. It's John.Zitko. I don't even know my own email. John, JOHN.ZITKO at assuredpartners.com. Happy to pick up the phone, to have a conversation with you guys about it.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining today. Like I said, it's been a great conversation, educational for me. And so I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me. And if we can do anything else for the association, we're here to help.
Cool. I appreciate it. All right. Thank you for listening to the ASA Podcast. For more subcontractor-focused content, visit us at asaonline.com and fastcares.org. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.